Don't watch, well, I haven't for quite some time, frankly, any David Pakman stuff. He's just, he's okay on domestic policy, but through and through imperialist with his worldview, whether it's, about Venezuela, North Korea. He shows some of his, I think, imperialist worldview when asking, gets a question from somebody in his audience, what should Joe Biden do about Cuba? So we're going to downvote that, and then we're going to listen.
Very American-centric way to ask the question, and I think it's important to start with first. Joe Biden doesn't necessarily have to do anything about Cuba in the sense that the United States doesn't have to be involved in every issue in every country. That's a starting point. That's not isolationist. That's we don't have to be involved everywhere all the time.
The world would be a lot better off if the United States wasn't involved in any country. Because whenever they do, it's in the interest of U.S. empire serving capitalism and white supremacy abroad. It's never about helping the most vulnerable and marginalized in those societies. There's always ulterior motives. I mean, we don't have 700 plus bases in 70, 80 plus countries to promote, human rights and democracy. You don't do that through the barrel of a gun, and the U.S. has never done that.
Now, you might say, hold on a second, David. The U.S. is already involved in Cuba because of the embargo, and for other reasons. It's already entangled, and I would agree with you 100%. And we'll get into that in a second. But the first point is reframing. Joe Biden doesn't have to do anything about what's going on in any...
Well, what he should obviously do is remove all of the embargoes, all of these sanctions on Cuba, and there are many right now. At the bare minimum, do that, and then pay the country, the government, reparations. It's in the, I believe, 100 plus billion, probably more dollars at this point, that the people of Cuba have lost as a result of this embargo, of this economic warfare that has been waged against their country since the 1959 revolution there that overthrew the U.S.-backed Batista dictatorship. Bare minimum.
Country by definition. Now, because part of why Cuba is the way it is today, part of...
No, I would say completely. Again, look at what Cuba has been able to do, even though the U.S. has been trying to just literally strangle that country to death in order to institute regime change, in order to institute socialist government that actually, tries to look out for the best interests of the working class. And yes, it's not perfect, but for fuck's sake, they have universal health care there. They have universal higher education. You want to go to college, you want to be a doctor, PhD, whatever, paid for by the state. Lower infant mortality rate than the U.S. So yes, I'm going to say any problems that they have right now are because of the fucking U.S. Don't.
Related to the American embargo of Cuba. At absolute minimum, Joe Biden should be getting rid of the amped up sanctions that Donald Trump put in.
No, not minimum. Again, don't half-ass this. Get rid of all of them. There's no reason that the U.S. needs to be sanctioning Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Syria, etc. But Pac-Man is somehow arguing, no, only get rid of some. The harsher ones, get rid of those. Maybe the more mild ones, those can stay. I'm okay with a little bit of death and destruction in service of the U.S. empire. What the fuck?
Those sanctions,
it's again, why some of these people are okay, domestic policy, but, their worldview just doesn't make a whole lot of sense because they're, whether they know it or not, are just parodying these U.S. State Department talking points in service of U.S. empire and imperialism.
And stated some of those, Joe Biden should immediately step back from those.
All of them.
At the same time, The U.S. simply cannot, and by cannot I mean should not, it's a moral question, should not be involved in any kind of influence campaign for regime change in Cuba. American involvement in regime change in Central...
But he doesn't want to get rid of all the sanctions? What the fuck does he think the point of the sanctions are? The point of the sanctions are to make it so hard for the people there that they will overthrow the government as a result.
Latin, South America, however you want to slice and dice that region of the world, has been almost exclusively a disaster, and there are so many stories of that. You can look at Colombia, you can look to a lesser degree in Argentina, Nicaragua, Honduras. I mean, there's just so many questions. So,
wait, what is he talking about? Nicaragua?
American involvement in regime change in Central...
Oh, is he talking about maybe like the U.S. Arming and funding the Contras who were fighting the Sandinistas? In that case, yes, then I agree with
America,
that.
however you want to slice and dice that region of the world, has been almost exclusively a disaster, and there are so many stories of that. You can look at Colombia, you can look to a lesser degree in Argentina, Nicaragua, Honduras. I mean, there's just so many questions. So my preference
Chile.
would be, because remember, I'm a progressive anti-authoritarian. My tendencies are not fascist. My tendencies are not authoritarian. They're not dictatorial. I'm a small L progressive.
So he obviously doesn't really understand politics, or maybe he hasn't read any Lenin or Marx, because the only reason states come into existence is because the class antagonisms that exist. In case of the United States, the class antagonisms between the capitalists and the proletariat, or the capitalists and the working class, and we currently have a dictatorship for the bourgeoisie, for the capitalists, for the wealthy titans of industry who own the means of production, etc. And an actual socialist country, we would want a dictatorship of the proletariat. A system, even if there is a little bit of authoritarianism involved, is not inherently a bad thing, depending on what it's designed and how it's executed. If we have a dictatorship of the proletariat, and the government, the workers' councils, etc., are doing the best to make sure to protect the needs of the working class and the gains that they have made, and making sure to improve life for them at the expense of maybe not having any billionaires in that country, and making sure there's not massive amounts of wealth or income inequality. That type of dictatorship, that type of authoritarianism is good in my opinion. So I just don't agree with again, that makes no fucking sense. If you actually want a socialist, communist, leftist regime to stay in power, there has to be a little bit of authoritarianism in play to keep the counter-revolutionaries in check, to keep the right-wing reactionaries, the U.S.-backed right-wing reactionaries in all of these countries, in check, or they're just going to keep continuing to try to overthrow these socialist projects. And Michael Parenti has a really good video on YouTube, this little 5-6 minute clip talking about these socialist countries are always labeled as authoritarian. Why is that? What's that about? And again, it kind of gets into what I was talking about a little bit there, but check it out.
I can't support any regime that's been in power since 1959 and that was handed from one brother to another. Doesn't matter if what it was replacing was bad. It doesn't matter if it was replacing something that was supported by the U.S. in the 50s. I'm a progressive libertarian, so there are certain principles.
That doesn't really a progressive libertarian. Like, again, the whole term progressive doesn't really mean anything. You notice he doesn't call himself a socialist or communist, and which is good. He doesn't claim to have those inclinations, because he's definitely not a socialist, definitely not communist. Doesn't seem to be very familiar with Lenin or Marx, but he's a progressive libertarian. But again, I don't think there's anything particularly progressive about his politics, because they more often than not support U.S. imperialism and State Department talking points, CIA talking points.
Really important, and one is I don't support dictatorial regimes, police states, etc. So
does he not support the U.S. then? And again, I think it's so fucking funny. Anybody from the Imperial Corps, anybody from the U.S., commentators like David Pakman, talking about police states when the United States has the world's largest prison population. We never got rid of slavery in this country. The Constitution makes it perfectly fine for slavery to continue to happen within the prison system. The United States runs the notorious prison torture camp at Guantanamo Bay. You don't hear David Pakman talking about that in this segment, but Cuba, they're the authoritarian state. They're the police state. Pretty telling.
The U.S. should not support the Castro regime, but should have zero involvement in regime change operations. But beyond that, I don't know that I'm hugely inclined to say the U.S. should have a bigger and bigger role. I would love to see U.S. aid leveraged and used. Other nonprofit groups are eager to help in Cuba. Make it easier for them to do that. Send food aid, send medical aid. I know some people say Cuba doesn't need any medical aid. Okay, they do. But beyond that, I am very skeptical of American involvement in Cuba because it has been pretty disastrous for a long time. I know it bums me out, but there are some authoritarian leftists. Are they really leftists? I know that's a question you will ask. But
are they really leftists? He's obviously not a leftist. He's in support of U.S. imperialism. What was it? I think Bolivia, when the right-wing Christian fanatics took over that country through that military coup, he wasn't ready to call it a coup at that point, and then he's about to shit on Venezuela and North Korea, two countries he clearly doesn't know anything about, and is again just parroting State Department talking points in service of more aggression and regime change against these countries.
Self-described leftists who are authoritarian in my audience, who have a different perspective on Cuba, they really like the Castro regime. It's tough for me to find common ground with that because I just can't support any kind of autocratic police state type regime that's lasted 60 years. I just can't do it. I don't support that in North Korea.
The reason it's lasted so long is not because it's authoritarian or autocratic or a police state or any of this other bullshit. He's, again, just basically could be reading off a U.S. State Department talking point memo and instituting regime change in Cuba. The reason they've been able to last so long is because the people there are actually in support of the revolution of having a government that guarantees health care and higher education as a human right. I mean, Jesus Christ, again. Not surprising, but I mean, Jesus Christ, that people on the supposed left, this progressive libertarian, he's not very libertarian either, right?
It's shorter and different, but in Venezuela.
See, talking shit about Venezuela.
Send me your thoughts. What should or should not Joe Biden?
Yeah, so again, get your news and analysis from actual left, anti-imperialist voices, David Pakman, TYT, Majority Report. Shit ain't cutting it. Mint Press News, The Gray Zone, Richard Medhurst, Black Agenda Report, Danny Haifong, Rania Kalick, Electronic Intifada, Jackson Hinkle, Jimmy Dores, Foreign Policy's Good. Lots of better sources than people that, literally parrot State Department talking points about countries like Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, etc. Like the video if you like the damn video. Subscribe for more content. Peace. Much love.